Hi, Steph from the BMW DIY Guy. My project today is I'm going to be upgrading the AvinUSA Android 8.1 display in my BMW F3X to the brand new 9.1. I'm really excited to get this in. The changes in this are primarily back-end. The screen is still similar. The install is going to be very similar to what you've seen before if you've watched my previous videos, but this is an update to the actual version of Android itself. This requires a physical change. This isn't something you could just flash on the previous 8.1 display. So I'm excited to get this in so I get the updated version of Android, and that'll be good to go. Now, before you go anywhere, please make sure to click subscribe and the little notification bell next to it so you get updates on all my upcoming videos. I have a ton of projects coming, plus more. I also wanted just to mention that I'm really super excited. I now have shirts. I've got swag and all kinds of other things that you can get. Check it out on eBay, search for BMW DIY Guy, and you can find them. Phone cases, hoodies, t-shirts, all kinds of cool things. And as soon as I can get my hands on mine, I'll be wearing it. So, let's get out to the garage, let's get the install started, and I'll walk you through the whole process. Alright guys, so here we are out in the car, and I've already got the Avin 8.1 display in. So if you're watching this video, following my series as I've gone through time, I've done the 4.4, 7.1, 8.1, and this is the 9.1. If you're coming from the OEM display, the install is almost the same, so don't worry about it. I'll talk about the differences. The only other probably difference that I've got on my car is I've got the Auron gauges display, so I'll have an extra cable in here as well. You may not have that. If you don't, you should. They're pretty darn amazing, let me tell you. Check out my video for that. So let's start to take your dash apart. Now, always be super careful. The far end where your trim here, red in my case, is that just narrow down at the end. Don't just grab this and pull because you can snap that end off. Don't do it. That would be really bad because there's no good way to replace this little piece. You'd be looking at replacing the entire piece, and these are unreasonably expensive for what they are. So just grab and dig your fingers in. Mine's a little bit looser than yours might be, obviously, because I've had mine off so many times, but even then it's still a tight fit. And pull it away, make sure that that far end down there comes off, and pull it off and pull it away. So like I said, in my case, I've got an extra cable to talk about, but it's pretty straightforward. So in general, you'll have two cables here. You'll have one for your hazards and your lock. You just simply pull, and these can be really stiff. If you've never had these off before, they can be spectacularly stiff. So just be careful. Get the button switch off here, which mine in this case is actually deciding to be really tight for some reason. So just work this switch out, just like that, and it'll slowly back out. All of this is pretty tight, and my plug is actually out. I just got to get it out of the fitting. And then I've got one more plug back here to deal with because of my Auron gauges. So I'm going to get that off as well. That's what this extra one here right is. You're not going to have that. So what we're going to do next after this, I'm going to get these unplugged and get these cables out and set this safely aside. It's a little off balance, so make sure to not put it in a place where it's going to fall over or break. That would be a huge bummer. And then the things we're going to do next, I'll get my hand out of the way, but we're going to take out, so you have a T20 here and here for the top part of your central dash trim. You've got a T20 here and back here, which is what's holding your display in place. So I'm going to take those out. I'll show you the next steps as we move forward once I get this unplugged. All right, so I've adjusted my camera a little bit so you can see the lower part of the dash here. You can use a plastic trim tool or just your fingers, kind of pry at this edge and it'll come down and away. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of extra cabling in here as well because I've installed the LCI console surround, so I've got lights here on the outside. So if you're like, hey, you've got some extra cabling and some extra lights there, that's the reason why. You can just take this piece and pull it out of the way. The cables are normally long enough. You don't have to worry about unplugging it, but that will expose your T20s, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you'll want to take these off, and you want to take the two that secure down the display. And at that point, that's pretty much everything that you need to get this out. There's going to be a couple of T20s holding down your head unit as well. So the other thing I'm going to recommend, because you're going to have to slide your head unit out partially, and I'll show you that as soon as I get to it. But put a cloth down over your center console, something similar. I'm lucky enough to have the carbonaceous carbon fiber interior here in my car. The last thing I'd want to do is scratch that up. So whether you've got the aluminum or piano black, which is especially touchy for scratches and the like, and that's what I came from. That's also what most of your center console surrounds are, this piano black. So they're really sensitive because they're so shiny. They're sensitive to getting scratched. It's the last thing you want to do. So as I take out this last one, we'll show you the connection here. So your center console only plugs in now. It'll just pull straight off because it's sitting on posts, right? So there's one cable, and in my case, I've got two because I've got the lights. So if you've got the lights, you've got this extra cable here that's plugged in here at the bottom. If you don't have it, that's okay. You don't have the LCI model. If you want it, I definitely recommend it. It's a nice little addition. The LCIs have lights around the side like we do on our doors. It's a super easy retrofit. It was one of the very first things I did to my car. Now this plug right here for your center console, mine came out fairly easily. Now I've done this install many times, and I've seen that plug be unbelievably tight. So be really careful when you take those off, because the last thing you want to do is break something, right? And a broken plug, whether it's on the plug side, you actually break the plug itself, which would be a huge drag. Often replacing those plugs can be a bit of a hassle. Or if you broke the socket that it fits into, that would really suck too, right? Because you just have to replace the entire piece for a simple broken plug socket. That would be a drag. So all of this stuff is not hard. It's super simple, honestly. And if you've seen my videos over time, I've done a lot of these, and you can see how easy it is to take your dash apart. And it's really simple. It's not hard at all. It only takes a couple of tools and a little bit of patience. And it comes right apart. So you can see I don't know why you wouldn't do this install yourself. Okay, so my display is loose, so you can take it on either side and just wiggle it up a little bit. So as you can see, it's out. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of your head unit. If you've got the base head unit, which is just the CD, you'll only have 2, and that's okay. So we'll just take these 4 out, and then we'll talk about what we're gonna do. So as I take these 4 out, you're gonna be plugging in a new wiring harness into the back of your head unit. So there's a big, huge square plug on the back of your head unit that you're going to unplug. It's that original cabling. You're going to plug that into the wiring harness, the new wiring harness for Avin, and then the other end back into your head unit. Now, one thing you're going to want to have to do, or you're going to need to do, if you have it, is on the original plug, there may be a green cable and a black cable that go into a small, narrow little plug. That's your optical connection. You may need to transfer that from the original plug to the end of the new plug on the new wiring harness, so it still plugs in. Lots of folks have it or don't. I've talked to a lot of people over time who are like, I don't have the green and black plug. What does that mean? Well, you're fine. If you don't have it, you don't have it. You just need to transfer it if you do. And in my case, I do. Okay, so I'm going to take a cloth here really quickly, put it over my console. Last thing I want to do is bang up my center console at all. Okay, so I've got that down. Because your head unit is surprisingly heavy for its size, so just grab it and slide it out. And then you can pull it out and turn it on its side to get to all the wiring in the back. This is where some of this is going to be a little hard to show. So what I'll do is I'll show the wiring harness, forgive some plastic crinkling. I'll show the wiring harness that we're looking at for the new one to help explain what's going on in the back of the head unit. So this is what the plug on the back of your head unit looks like. It's got a little flip lock lever. You pull that lever down and away, and the plug will come off the back of the head unit. Now, when we look at this here, you'll also see that there are these 2 little open socket spots right here. This, as you look at it, you can see the orientation I'm in. So you've got the pin plugs here, you've got those 2 block plugs here. This spot, so the right-hand spot, and you can compare. So when you pull the original OEM plug off, and you've got the green optical cable, if you have it, you can just hold it up and compare. Okay, here's the orientation of my original here out of the dash, which you can see right here. You can put them up in the same orientation, just like this, and you can say, okay, so the green and black optical cable goes in right here. Make sure it goes in the same spot. It's keyed, so it can only go in one way. Mine is really hard to show because it's on the back of the head unit right now, but you should get the idea. You use a plastic trim tool or a pick and lift the little lever. There's a little locking plate right there that you can kind of get at with, you can see me moving it hopefully with my fingernail. Slide that cable out, and then what you're going to do is, this is the end of the new harness, right? This is the end that goes into the back of the head unit. You'll slide it into the same spot and put it on the back of the head unit. So hopefully that makes sense. Here's the other end. This is the female end. So you're going to take your original OEM plug that you have here. You're going to plug it in the same orientation into the new one and lock the collar down to lock it into place. Now I'm not going to do that right now because I still need to move some things around. One thing, so if you've got OEM, this is where you would be. You pull your original cable off. If you have the optical cable, pull it out, transfer it. You're good to go. If you're doing an upgrade like I am, I always pull out the existing wiring harness. The wiring harnesses absolutely have and do change over time. Do not reuse the previous wiring harness for a new display. So if you're moving from Avin or ENN, I think they're called, or whatever, don't reuse the same harness. Use the one that they sent you. Okay. So what I'm going to need to do at this point, so as I'm doing the upgrade, I've got to take mine, and like I said, it's kind of hard to see because it's right here on the back. So this is the locking collar, and I work that locking collar up, and I work the plug out. So now my plug's out. Now hopefully, let me see if I can bend it a little bit. You can see right here, a black and green optical cable. You can see the positions it's in. I'm going to lift it and pull it out. So now, see, now it's out. That's the cable that you want to transfer if you have it. Okay. So now my wiring harness for my 8.1 is pretty much loose. You've got all the rest that goes up here to the top of the display. If you have the OEM and you undo these two screws, pull the display up, and normally you can get enough cabling that you can get it up and turn it around. Because what you're going to want to do is get to the back of it. So I've got lots of cabling here, so I've got a lot that I've got to move to get some space. Okay, so here's the back of your display. If you've got the OEM, you only have one plug, and that's this kind of purpley magenta plug right here. This is your iDrive video connection. And I'm going to talk about this a fair amount as we go through this. Again, because I'm doing the upgrade, I've got all these extra cables. I've got the blue as GPS. I've got all these extra cables for all of my other connection runs and all the rest. If you're doing the upgrade, just pull and unplug all of these, and we're going to pull the wiring harness out. If you've got the OEM, undo this magenta plug and pull it down and away. And this can also be really stiff. Some of the upgrades I've done for folks, I've found this cable to be spectacularly stiff. It's got a little lock right here, so depress the lock and pull down and away from the plug, and it should come down and away. If you have to, you can use like a plastic trim tool and pry on it a little bit, but be very careful with this. The only times, so post-install and working with people, or sometimes I'll get I get a no signal from the iDrive side. So when you're looking at your display, it's all plugged in, it's powered, the Android side works fine, and you flip to the iDrive side and it says no signal. I would say probably 99% of the time that I see that, it's this plug. There's something about this plug, either at your head unit, because it's been wiggling around so much it's a little bit loose, or it's a little bit loose here at the display. And in a couple of examples, it was loose by 1/8 of an inch. They were like, well, I was talking to the person, or talking to the owner of the car, and they're like, well, I pressed on it and it clicked. It went up like 1/8 of an inch and it clicked, and now it works. Okay, so that's the deal. The one other thing I also want to mention while I'm here is you can see my door on my display is off right now because I've been taking my SD card in and out quite a bit in the side of this. If you're going to install an SD card in your display, do it now. This door is really hard to get to when it's on the back. When this is installed, it's really hard to get to. So if you're going to install an SD card, or if you're doing an upgrade and you have one in, don't forget to take it out. Okay, install the SD card before you put the display in, and then put the cover back on, and it's going to be significantly easier. All right, don't have to fiddle with it later. All right, so I'm going to unplug all of this. I've explained it all really well. I'm going to unplug all this, pull the wiring harness out, and I'm going to show you how to route the new one in. And You know, we're past 50% already. This is super simple. This is something you can absolutely do yourself at home. So the previous wiring harness is out, and if you have the OEM screen, this is essentially where you would be, where you would have your head unit out, you'd have your main cable unplugged, you'd have your display off. So we're kind of at the same point whether you're doing the upgrade or whether you're coming from OEM. Now, I've done a couple of things. Your USB cable, or excuse me, your USB and GPS cable. So your GPS antenna looks like this. So usually we'll have a magnet and or adhesive on the back and has this blue plug-in. This will go on the back of your display. What I normally do is I stick it to the inside of the console, either here or up underneath. And I've already done that, and since this GPS antenna is the same, I'm going to keep my existing one, so I'm just going to talk about it. You just peel off and stick it in, and then route the cable underneath your vents and up through the hole in your center dash right here, and you can see the plug right here, so that's good to go. Here is the original iDrive plug, that kind of magenta, purple, whatever you want to call it. And then the other thing that I've done is this USB cable. So this is the cable that's going to plug into the back of your display that has two USB ports on it. Now, I've compared cables and compared pinouts. My previous and the current is exactly the same. So when I talked about not reusing the wiring harness, I mean the primary wiring harness. If you're doing an upgrade path like I am, check very closely. In this case, the cable is exactly the same. So I'm going to leave it in. But where I route this, so if you open your glove box, and you can see all the garbage in my glove box, right? So on the roof of your glove box is one of two things, either nothing or a little netted little slip in place. There's a U-shaped hunk of plastic. If you pull that down carefully, use your plastic trim tool, get it in underneath the plastic and pry down gently, it'll come out. I don't see the reason to have it there personally. And maybe you can keep your sunglasses in it or something. But mine didn't have it. Well, what you do have are little holes in the roof of your glove box where that netting plugs in. It's perfect for this cable. So I actually fit it in through one of the holes and feed the cable up and around right here. So my two USB adapters are in my glove box, or my two USB plugs are in my glove box. They're out of the way. I don't have to see them. I've got my forward-facing camera, which you cannot see. It's off screen right now, routed down through the headliner and down the A-pillar and into my glove box. So it's a USB plug. I've got that plugged in there. So that's good to go. It gives me a lot of flexibility to keep things plugged in and not see them. So I'd recommend routing that direction. You can definitely make your own decision there as well. Now, the one other thing I wanted to talk about as well before we start wiring the extra harness in is the auxiliary port. So when you look at your new wiring harness, you've got audio out, and it is a female, aux cable port. Under your armrest, you've got the same. You've got an aux in. So in some cases, and I'm going to apologize, I can't tell you why some need to do this and some do not. I've tried to figure out what the differences are. I've tried to figure out what the variable is. I can't figure it out. Some owners will need to run this auxiliary cable. So to get sound from the Android side, so after all you've done, if you've got the green optical cable, you've transferred that, everything, you don't have sound from the Android side and you did not plug this in, this is the reason why. And more often than not, I get comments from folks who are like, I don't have any sound from the Android side. My first test that I give everybody is plug a set of headphones in right here. So open your dash back up, plug in a set of headphones right here and see if you have sound from the Android side. If you do, then Android is fine. You have to run the auxiliary cable to your auxiliary port. If you have sound here and you did run the auxiliary cable, then test your auxiliary port underneath your armrest to make sure that it's working okay. I've definitely seen cases where it's bad or it's been beaten up, and people are like, oh yeah, my aux port underneath my armrest is bad. So be careful with that. But in my case, I'm one of the lucky ones. I don't have to run this cable, so I'm not going to do it. If you need to, you can run it down out through the side right here, underneath the side trim of your center console, run it up underneath. If you pull the tray out from your armrest, you can get to the holes underneath. You can feed the aux cable up and then plug it straight into the port. It's really stealth, you won't see it. So that'll be fine and you'll be okay there. Okay, so here's your primary wiring harness. We're going to plug this in last. Here's the other end. The one other thing I want to talk about as we talk about options is these are your connections if you add an aftermarket backup camera. I have the OEM camera, which integrates seamlessly, so I don't need to add anything extra. If you do add a backup camera, which goes in the trunk, either the trunk handle type or the type that replace a license plate light, you would run the cable down the sideboards, up underneath, up through your dash, up through these same holes. You plug it in here. You can provide power to your camera from here as well, and then you've also got your trigger. So camera detect, DET, is your trigger wire. So I've installed a ton of backup cameras. I'm not going to do it in this case because obviously I've got the OEM one. I want to be able to at least give you a little bit of a heads up on how to do it. I have a couple of videos showing you how to do it, and it's going to be very similar, whether you look at the 5 series or others. So not hard to do. I just won't speak to it in this particular video. Okay, so let's get to the good part. So take your cable, and there's vents right here. There's holes in the plastic trim. Take it and just feed this up and in. Just gonna bend the cable a little bit, get it to come around this bend right here. And part of this is gonna be cable management. If you have the factory navigation with this big head unit, you really kind of have a finite amount of space to deal with. So cable management is going to be really important because getting this head unit in can be really tight, really tight, because it's also designed to not add anything, right? So we're adding this cable harness, we're adding other things. So you're going to be in a situation where you're adding cables to a space that's inherently kind of tight to begin with, okay? So I usually take these extra cables and tuck them down, and you don't need a lot of extra cabling here at the top. What you can do is take all of this, plug it into your display, make sure it's in snug like I mentioned earlier, turn your display around and settle it into place, and then pull these cables back down to pull as much as you can out of there and gain a little bit of room back. Okay, so this is where you take your primary wiring harness. Like I said, we've got the female end here. You take your original cable right here with the little horse collar lock back. It only fits in one way. So fit that into place and walk the horse collar down in. When you're replacing this or putting this back into place, you really want to take it and push it down and kind of either right or left as far as you can to get all of this out of the way of your head unit when you're going to put it back in. Okay? So, and then the other thing, again, because I don't want us to forget it, if you've got the green and black optical cable, so this is the end of your new cable. It goes in, again, this orientation, you can see the pins on this side, plugs across the top. It goes in this right-handmost slot. I usually do it last because this cable's so short, it gives you very little room to work with. It only goes in one way, so as you can see, as I'm trying to fit this in here, I'm trying to fit it in wrong. It doesn't want to go in, so I'm going to turn it and just bang. And it's in, and you can see it's in on this side. So if you forget to do this, you're not going to have sound on the iDrive side. So you're like, well, I have sound from, other sound works, but now my iDrive doesn't work. Well, that's the most common source of it. Again, I'm not trying to repeat myself. I apologize, but I do get a lot of comments of folks who are like, but what if I don't have the green and black cable? Then you're fine. You can't move something you don't have, right? Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of this cabling back in to get it out of the way. At this point, you can take your new cable, your new wiring harness. I'm going to fit it around the rest of this cable's here on the back a little bit, and you can fit it to the back of your display. And again, with that horse collar, it only goes one way, so make sure that you get it set in the correct direction. Okay, so we're just going to take that and get that all plugged into place. All right, so as I turn and turn and turn and turn, it's pretty tight space to work with all in all, because it's only designed to be as tight as you possibly can and fit into only as the space as you can. Okay, so that's set for now. Make sure the lock collar sits down really, really well. And then let's look at the back of your display. Now, I've already put my SD card back in and put the cover back on, like I mentioned a minute ago. And then the rest of your cables only go in one place. Big cable, medium cable, small cable. So there's no possibility of plugging them in the wrong place. Your GPS antenna goes here. Your iDrive goes here. So let's just take all this and plug them in. All of these are keyed, so they really only go on one way. Cable is flexible, which is nice. I'm going to move this around. The other thing I need to do is I need to take my USB plug and not forget that. Now, the one thing, oh, that reminds me. One thing I wanted to mention. There's also another cable bundle I'm not going to plug in. So let me grab it here. The other cable bundle I'm not plugging in is this guy. So this is the medium plug, right? So the big plug is the primary bus plug. The small one is for your USB. The medium is for this one. So when you look at this, you really have to decide, do you need it? So when you look at all the different plugs, now if you're gonna run the microphone, so you're going to take calls directly off of your display or something similar, then yes, you absolutely have to plug this in. Don't miss it. You've got DVR in if you're doing a DVR that requires a coax style plug, RCA style plug, video out, video in, auxiliary in, video out, DVR in, auxiliary left in. So I'm not going to run the microphone, so I'm not going to do it. So I'm not going to plug this in. I'm a big believer of only plugging in what I need. It cuts down on the amount of stuff in this space, right? So that's why in my case I'm missing one plug. If you are going to use it, again, route it up through and plug it into the medium plug spot. Okay. So we've got our cabling set up here. So I'm going to plug my USB in. I always use that because of my accessories that I want to run. Plug in the big cable, and they're keyed so they only go one direction, so you don't have to worry about plugging them in wrong, which is nice. Just like that. Really make sure they're snapped in nice and tight. In that case, that one really kind of stuck a little bit. There it is, see? So if I'd let that be on that very first attempt, it only would have been about halfway plugged in. So make sure that they're plugged in really firmly. The USB went in firmly. The primary bus cable is now in and in firm. And like I mentioned before, your iDrive cable, it only goes in one way. This is your video feed cable. So it only goes in one way, and make sure it's all the way in and really push on it to make sure it's in. Okay, so all of that's in. I'm going to really carefully, because I'm not trying to yard on my cables too hard, turn this back around. This is that opportunity I talked about where you pull out any of the extra slack and extra cables that are back here to give yourself the most room here at the top. And this fits down nice and seamlessly. Only goes in one spot. You'll see it just walk down into place, just like that. And it's in. So at this point, everything is plugged in. It's just a matter of putting everything back together. So all the hard part, if there is a hard part, is done. So whether you're coming from an OEM or an upgrade place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my head unit back in. I will talk about that. We'll talk about putting the trim back on. It's really simple. It's just putting all back into place, but I'll do a quick just walk through of get everything back in. We'll talk about your center trim here. I actually find it's easier. The plug that goes into the button, right? Your locks and hazards button. I find plugging that in when it's in place in your trim is, for me, really hard. I usually will take my plastic trim tool, depress one of the little metal plates that hold that button into place and push it out of the center of my dash. And then I've got a hole so there in the center. I'll feed the cable through the hole, put my dash into place, and then plug it in the button and push the button into place. It's a lot easier that way. Okay, so let me get my head unit straightened out and back into place. Pull all the cables down. We'll talk about putting it all back together, and we're almost done. The head unit is in and secure, which is great. If you haven't noticed already, all of your T20s are exactly the same all the way around, so it doesn't matter which ones you use where. Same length, so that's not a problem. So just use them all in. So 2 to hold your display down, 4 to hold your head unit in. Hopefully it wasn't a problem to get your head unit back in. Like I said, if you tuck that cable, especially those big blocks of the new wiring harness, back and down, then your head unit should go in okay without a problem. The one other thing you want to make sure that you didn't trap down was your cables for your central dash right here. Make sure that those didn't get pulled down or trapped down. I know I've done that where I'm just like, hey, why do I only have one? At least in my case, I've got an extra one for my Omron gauges. And then your cable as well for your central controls right here. So just make sure you didn't lose those in the shuffle. Okay, so you can take your center console again, plug it in, just like that. I'm going to take my extra cabling because, like I said, I've got my display, or I've got the lighting on this. Really recommend it. If you haven't done that, definitely do it. And so just get this tucked back into place. And you can just take the extra cabling and just push it, kind of feed it back into place. And then it'll just hang there, which is really nice because there's a couple of posts that keep it in place. So you'll take your 4 and just put them right back in. Any 4 will do. You really shouldn't have too many left at this point. You should probably only have 4 left. If you've got more than 4, then I'd be a little concerned. Doesn't matter which order you put them back in. This is just to secure this piece down. And then at this point, you are pretty much done. As like I said, with the exception of putting your center dash back in. Now, what I would recommend is that if you're not as familiar with this process, this is a great time to test. So you want to make sure that everything is working, especially if you've added something like a backup camera or forward-facing camera, any complexities like that. Before you put all this back together, and I'm not trying to be hypocritical as I'm putting these screws back in, this is a great time to test. Having that, because the only thing that's not plugged in at this point is that center switch, which is not going to throw any errors, or your car's not going to freak out with that center switch plugged in, or not being plugged in. So I'm going to finish this 4th, and then we can test. Now what I am going to do though, because I'm confident with my installation, so if you want to pause at this point and definitely test, I would do so. Just power your car up normally, make sure that everything works, test the display, make sure that you have sound from the iDrive side, that you have sound from the Android side, and I'm going to do that here in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and put my center dash in first. So the one thing I wanted to point out, let me pick up my center dash here. Here is the back of your switch. You can see there's a little metal locking plate right there. You can take a pick tool or very narrow screwdriver, slide it in very carefully not to crack the plastic, and then this switch will push forward and out, and that makes it so much easier, which I'm going to do. I've got to go get my pick to push this forward. So push it forward, plug this back in, run the cabling through the center where your switch won't be if you do this, and then just feed this back into place. Gently feed it back into place. It just presses right back in with good gentle hand pressure. Be gentle on the other end when you snap that back into place as well. I've seen people with broken off trim, so don't be them. And then at that point you're all back together. So I'm going to finish that, then I'll come back, we'll power the display up, we'll make sure that everything works, so I'll show you that it works. The one thing that I'll be careful to do is whenever I capture any sound or music on my videos, I accidentally, like on the radio or whatever, I get YouTube takedowns because it's someone else's copyrighted material. So I'm going to be a little careful with the sound, but we'll show that it works. I just don't want my video taken down. So, and this is the install video, not the review. So, and I'll follow up on a review video on this as well, but let me finish up the install and I'll show you what's next. All right, so all my trim's back into place. I pulled my switch out like I said I was going to. When you push this back into place, you plug in the top connection, that top plug. You feed the plug for your button through the hole, because you take plastic trim tool or a pick tool, depress the little locking plate on the button, and the button will push forward out of your center console. Then feed the cable through, push this all really gently back into place, plug in your cable, and then push your button back into place. I find it's the easiest way to do it. Also plugged in my Omron gauges again. If you don't have them, I recommend them. Really are a lot of fun, actually. So, and then just take and just gently push your console back into place. Again, be gentle at the far end that you don't break it. And then also, if you noticed your vents, where your vents go back into place, that you don't have any cables in the way. You've got lots of cables there now too, so make sure that they're tucked above or below your vents. And then your trim piece has foam around where the vents fit in, and that foam is actually pretty important. One, it helps hold all of this in place. Two, it helps keep plastic from hitting plastic and making vibrating noises or being irritating, but it's foam. So if you really just smash this back in place, you can tear your foam up, it makes a mess, and it won't hold this as securely. So at this point, our install is done. It's super simple. So let's go ahead and do a first startup here. And I went all the way to startup of the car. Now the one thing about these displays, and I'm going to change my camera angle here in a second to show what we're looking at and actually zoom in a little bit, but these displays will remember the last place you were. Now this is the first time that this system's coming up, so it's going to start up probably on the Android side by itself, as you can see, and it is. Alright, so it's up and running. Let me adjust my camera angle in to zoom in a little bit so I can show you what we're looking at, and also make sure that all of my cables are intact and everything is looking good. So let me flip around and then I'm going to show you what we're looking at. All right, I'll be right back. All right guys, so everything's plugged in, the display is working. I will do a full walkthrough video. I'm not going to do that today. I try to keep those separate between the installation videos and the walkthrough videos, but I do want to show a couple of things here right off the top of my head. As you can see, this is mimicking the iDrive 7 layout, but I wanted to show, and I'm going to hit my iDrive controls and go to radio. Now if you can see this overlay. So right now, the display thinks I've got a 6.5-inch original iDrive. So you can see it's kind of cut off in the corners. It's got this big fatty overlay right here. The display has to be told I've got an 8.8 original screen. If you have a 6.5, OEM 6.5-inch screen and you're coming to this one, you have two different options. One, you use this overlay. It'll have this overlay on the side because you cannot stretch a 6.5-inch image to 10.25 without it looking like garbage. This isn't a problem. This is on purpose to keep it'll stretch the screen as far as it can without it looking badly, or without it looking bad. You can't go all the way. Now, your one other option that I'm not going to cover here because it's a different app in a different place is using an app like BimmerCode or eSys or some others to actually get into the coding of your car. Depending on the age of your car, you can tell it that you can change it from a 6.5-inch display to an 8.8. You actually go in and tell it that it had an 8.8-inch display, then you won't have this overlay anymore. Your build date of the cars, from what I've read, have to be 2014, early 2014 and newer to have that in the code. That is there. Check the forums, go to BimmerPost, go to other places. You can see how to do it if you can do that. Some people can, some people can't. But if you can, it's a great thing, right? Okay, so go to the Android side, go to settings right there. And then I'm going to scroll down to factory settings. You've got passcode, it's 1314, hit OK. So this is taking you into some of the deeper settings on the display itself. There's lots of things in here you can do. I'll cover them in my walkthrough, but you want to go to car type, and this is where this matters. See, right now it's set to NBT 6.5 half screen. The other thing I want to stress here is there's folks that are like, oh no, I don't have my F3X, or I don't have, my F30, or whatever it happens to be. And you can scroll down this list and you can see all the options. See the CCC types, or the E60s, the CIC types that you go through. Our cars are and for my car, and 2014 F32, it's an NBT type. What you really care about is the screen type, NBT, and the screen size. So in this one, NBT 8.8 to 10.25. That's what we want. Don't worry about the model. I get people that stress about that. Don't worry about that. That doesn't actually matter. Okay. So double click on that. It'll say, do you want to change the model selection? Hit the checkbox. It's changed. So I'm going to go back to home. I can go to car info right here, or I can go, like radio off my iDrive controls. You notice now I've got my full iDrive screen. I've got my everything that I'd want on all sides. That overlay is gone. So that's where that overlay comes from. And that's how to change it or add it depending on what you have in your original car. Okay, so as you can see, we're up and working. We'll go back to the radio side. So had sound there for a second. I don't want a YouTube takedown, so I'm only going to do it for about a second. It works. I've checked the Android side. Everything is working there. I've already attached it to my wireless, so that's coming down as well, and it's updating apps and everything else like that. My time is currently set wrong. You can go in and make sure your time zone is set right. You can set it by GPS. I'll cover all those things in my walkthrough video, but as far as install, it's in, it's done, it works, it's great. So we're all done. We'll wrap up. It's time to put your tools away, clean up, and you're all good to go. All right, as you can see, that really isn't hard. You really only need one tool, and that's a T20 Torx to take all those bolts out. Plastic trim tool can help as well, so it's a good kit to have on hand. If you don't have one, make sure to check that out. They're really cheap, they're easy to get, and you'll find you use them a lot. I've beaten mine up pretty good. So I'm really glad to get this install done in my car. I think if you're coming from the OEM screen, you're going to see the advantages of this immediately, especially if you're coming from the 6.5. But even the 8.8 inch screen that I came from in my car, the difference really is dramatic. It's bigger, it's brighter, it's a higher resolution screen than what you have with the OEM. So it really does look better. I'll plan a walkthrough video coming up in the future to go through all of the features and functionality. Especially with the new iDrive 7 styled skin over the top. It really looks significantly different than the previous builds, and it's changed the way those tiles operate a little bit, but I want to walk you through all that. But this video really is intended to show you how to do the install itself. If you have any questions, please leave comments below. I always try to address everything I can. I'm happy to help out in any way that I can. Thank you to AvinUSA for the partnership on this project, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.